morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Let's Talk Dairy podcast. So I'm joined by two people this morning. As we said we're going to do, we're going to be joined by a member of the Grass10 team, just to give us a very brief update on where the grass situation is at the moment. So you're very welcome to the program, John, and thanks for joining.
Thanks, George. Yeah.
Maybe John, just give us a kind of an overview, please, of what's going on, where we are, and what the guidance is for the next week.
Yeah, well, we woke up. I think most of the country woke up this morning to frost on the grass, but it is only a grass frost this morning. It seems to be gone away already wherever the sun is hitting it. So, and that's led to, I suppose, we look at some of the maps here. The average soil temperature for the week is to be up around 6 to 7 degrees in most places. So even though it was chilly this morning, and that the soil temperature is still holding up well, and this is predicted from Tuesday. Through Met Aaron's predictions and with Elodie Ruel in Moore Park. And I suppose the weather over the last few weeks has been excellent. We couldn't ask for better at this time of year, to be honest with you. There is grass on farms. We can see here the average farm cover. Now there was a big jump in average farm covers done in the last week, a big jump. So it's probably a more accurate picture. It's coming in around 800 kilos of dry matter per hectare. Okay.
Where would you like, John, is it?
Sorry?
I'd say it's on the low side, is it?
It's probably on the low side, definitely. Most farms seem to be back due to low overwinter growth. And this growth here, this kilos here is 4 kilos. That's the growth that farms who measured the last week got. But that's not to say that it was a weekly growth. A lot of that is an overwinter growth. Some of it might be, might be a few farms that have done a couple of measures already this year. But it's usually an overwinter growth. Now, the thing about, I suppose, pasture-based, when you're measuring, like if you do a closing cover, then do your opening cover, if there's paddocks there that have actually gone back, it doesn't count as a negative growth. So the farm could grow 3, but there could be certain paddocks on the farm that have actually gone a little bit backwards. So, you just have to be wary of that. But this is where we are. Look, there's enough grass there, George, on nearly all farms to get out grazing, okay? Get the first 30% grazed. That's the key. And it's time to get animals out where they're not out, okay? Ground conditions are improving every day. Even on heavier soils, they're improving every day. And, for dry farms, really, we're actually looking at now getting into some of these awkward paddocks, some of the difficult paddocks, some of the wetter paddocks that maybe have poor infrastructure, that sometimes they're even a little bit hit or miss whether we even get to them. We're actually getting an opportunity now that we could go in and graze off some of those covers. So it's excellent. It's bonus territory for a lot of people. So look, getting animals out is key. Picking the right animals, obviously. Obviously, this on the dairy side, your dairy cows are going out. And
what about the beef farms, suckler farms?
Yeah, beef suckler farms. You're looking at letting out some lighter animals. Okay, it's important. You don't have to let out everything. We're talking about getting through like 1% of your farm every day. That's your sort of your spring rotation plan target. So it's not a big area to graze. If you have 100 acres, you graze an acre a day. Okay. So it's not a major amount of animals to get through that.
And John, would you not be tempted, if on a trickier farm, would you not be tempted, the weather is good, just grow a bit faster and graze a bit more of it in February, have it done, in case you get a turn in March that you have to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like heavier farms, like definitely get out and get going, as like go full throttle for the next couple of weeks, because we're after having 2 to 3 weeks of good weather already. We're in Ireland, right? We're going to be laid up for a week or two, and on those weather farms, they're going to be laid up for longer. So it's more important for them to get out and get grazing. The conditions are good now for all of that. Also great conditions for slurry, and like some farms have even grazed 10, 15, 20% of their farm already. So there's paddocks there available for getting slurry back out on. And also there's good conditions. You can see here with predicted rainfall is pretty low, especially in the east, and it's even less than like an inch in the west. Even most of it's 15, 20 mil type thing. So good for fertilizer as well, especially on responsive soils. Okay, we're not talking about putting it everywhere, but on the soils that do response, 23 units of fertilizer on the paddocks that haven't got slurry. So they would be the main messages for the week, is to get slurry out, get some fertilizer out. And also a lot of farms missed the opportunity with a wet back end to get lime out last year, and now is the perfect time to get it out. Okay, getting lime out, getting your soil pH corrected, that can release 75 kilos of nitrogen into the soil per hectare this year. So it's worth a lot to you. So yeah, keep grazing while it's good is the main message, George.
Okay, that's great, John. That's enough for you for today. We'll be joined again by yourself, or I think it's Joseph Dunfield coming on next week to talk to us. That gives us a good update. Get going and keep grazing when you have the opportunity. Thanks so much, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Right, guys and ladies, you're very welcome. We're very welcome and are very privileged to be joined by Mike Egan from Moore Park. Mike's a researcher down there. I know Mike, we're going back for quite a few years now. And his main claim to fame, lads, is he's moved to Laois. That's all we'd say. So he's come to the right
claim to fame, George, though, is it?
he's a Roscommon refugee. Welcome to the program, Mike. Mike, what we asked you to talk to us today is a little bit about an update on maybe cow intakes in early lactation, cow dry matter intakes in early lactation. Yeah, because there's a very interesting piece of work that you did, or that was presented by you at the Grass10 conference a few weeks ago. I think it's important that our listeners hear a bit about that.
Yeah, so thanks, George, and you're not a bad substitute for Emma Louise either, but our Stuart. But yeah, look, so thanks very much. Yeah, so just in terms of what we actually measured, so there has been a lot of talk on cow intakes, and most of the cow intake figures, particularly in early lactation, in terms of a lot of the intake figures we have are from kind of later on in the spring and mid-season, and they're measured dry matter intakes from Moorpark. But there hasn't actually been measured dry matter intakes done very early on in spring previously, and now all of the previous work would have been on predicted energy intake based on body weight, maintenance figures, and milk production. And then you get an energy predicted intake, and you can correct that out then for dry matter intake. And if you look at some of the work that was done in 2010 and 2011, Eva Lewis would have done that and would have done very, very good work in predicting dry matter intakes. But we want to actually look at what was, if you measure, what do you do? So we set up a study and we've ran it over 3 years in 2020, 21 and 2022. So it's not going on this year, it finished last year. And as soon as a cow calved, 3 to 4 days after calving, we started measuring actual dry matter intake of those cows over a period. So there was 80 cows in each year. So we have over 200 records from individual cows over the 3 year periods. And we've measured across the entire year, but we really focused on that first 10 to 12 weeks of intakes. We've measured those intakes for the first 10 to 12 weeks on those individual cows.
So to put it kind of in context for our group here, we're talking about February, March and April intakes.
Yeah, so like these would have been cows that would have started calving somewhere around the very end of January and moved on, and kind of we'd have a mean calving date of the 5th or 6th of February. So there would be early calving cows, and as soon as they're calving, we're getting that data from February.
Okay, so what did you find? Yeah,
so previously, and Eva's predicted intakes, and now the maintenance figure in terms of percentage UFL required was 5.5%. It's gone slightly up, so the figures have slightly changed. But outside of that, Eva's work would have originally shown that somewhere between 10 kilos dry matter intake on week 1 of lactation, and then increasing 1 kilo per week thereabouts for about 4 weeks afterwards, and then about half a kilo then per week thereafter. When we actually looked at and measured the actual dry matter intake, our intakes on start week 1, or the first 10 days of lactation, are much higher than previously thought, and are just over 13 kilos of a dry matter intake on the first 10 days of intake. So I suppose the main difference between ours is we're starting from a much higher base. And if I just show the slide here, George, in terms of that profile, in terms of where it actually is, you'll see it here now. So that intake, and this is the figure here. Can you see it?
Yep, perfect.
Yeah. So if you look at here, this is the actual intake profile from week 1 to week 10 and 12 of lactation. So historically, if we looked at it, and even with those figures, and if we updated, there probably would have been closer to 12 kilos, Eva's figures with the updated maintenance values. But if you look at it, we're about 13 kilos in week 1, or the first 10 days of lactation, and it's increasing then by just shy of a kilo per week for the first 4 to 5 weeks, and then just shy of a half a kilo then per week for the following 4 to 5 weeks afterwards. And I suppose that's the main difference. The profile itself in terms of the intake curve is very, very similar in terms of how it progresses from week 1 to week 10, but it's the start point that is the main variation in terms of, so we're starting at a much higher baseline.
So it's kind of 3 or 4 kilos higher than we would have predicted, would have expected based on the
old stuff. If you look at Eva's original work, it would have been just over 3 kilos. If you updated Eva's figures, it were just over 2 kilos of a higher intake. So yeah, we're between 2 and 3 kilos of a higher intake in that first 10 to week to 10 days of lactation.
So it's kind of 30% higher than we would normally have allowed for. It's a big difference, Mike.
It's a massive difference. And in terms of, if we look at what's happening, okay, cow types have changed. These cows have a a mature body weight of about 560 mature body weight. The mean calving date of this herd of cows, and this data was on average over the 3 years, was the 6th and the 8th of February. So they're quite early calving cows. Their milk solids would have been somewhere in 510 or 500 to 520 kilos of milk solids produced in the year, and 550 to 560 body weight. So they are a high producing herd and a high genetic merit cows for increased milk production, which would lead to a higher increased dry matter intake as well. So they are quite high. And if we look then, we've also measured dry cow intake. So historically, we've been talking 8 to 10 kilos of dry cow intake over the dry cow period. Measuring that here, and sorry, should have said the students on this are Michael Kennedy and Sarah Walsh, two PhD students that are working on this. But if you look what's happening over the dry cow period, and we've done work with Michael on that, historically 8 to 10 kilos, we're probably sitting 11 kilos on average, but fluctuation between 10 and 12 kilos of a dry matter intake over the dry cow period. So even the dry cow intakes are higher than previously thought, which is probably leading to that higher dry matter intake in week 1 of lactation too, because of the higher previous intakes. I know we were talking about before, George, and you do see a little bit of a decline in the immediate week to 10 days before calving. And historically we would have said it gone down quite low. Look, we're only dropping about 1 kilo to 1.5 kilos dry matter intake in that week to 10 days. It was quite hard to measure because cows been pulled out, but it is dropping just before calving, but it's coming back up very, very quickly straight after calving, and that's the key thing.
What about keeping them in then, Mike? If weather conditions are poor, what do we do? What are the practical implications of this analysis then, this results?
Yeah, so look, the first thing is, and the whole idea was this, that we can get better data on what's happening to these cows in early lactation, first of all, and then how do we manage the cow intake profile across that year to ensure that the animals are fully fed. So look, John was already saying there that farm covers are probably a little bit lower on farms at the moment, but conditions are excellent in terms of grazing. So I suppose in terms of the practical implications, number one, I think if you're doing feed budgets or fodder budgets on pasture base, this is going to make a big difference in terms of your grass supply on farm and the feed budget required to meet herd intakes. I suppose that's the biggest change that's going to happen. So if we were historically talking about a 2 kilo lower intake per week at start point, like we're now 2 to 2.5 kilos higher on average over the entire early lactation. So that's going to have a big intake on actual demand, number one, and on your feed budgets, predicting your feed budgets as well. So that's the biggest impact it's going to have. Second point then is when you are getting out to grass and conditions are allowing and if farm covers are lower, if there's not enough grass, if you know you're going out to your areas and your spring rotation plan or targets, and you're going out and you know that there's 8 to 10 kilos of dry matter available on that paddock for each individual cow, I suppose the key thing is now looking at this, that we make up the shortfall. So if there is a shortfall, number one, that we make up the shortfall with concentrate and silage thereafter. So you're talking 3 to 4 kilos of concentrate and then topping up with silage on top of that if there is a further intake requirement.
Yeah, that's the key message, I think, Mike. Yeah, like just I'm going to pull you up on one thing. You were talking about high yielding cows, but this group of attendees here and our first 600 profit monitors, the average milk solids produced per cow is about 500 kilos. So it's
I think if you look at an industry average, the industry has moved from where we were in 2010 and 2011 when that original piece of work was done to now. And I think, higher milk production is causing a higher intake, dry matter intake as well. So I think we do need to be in line that the milk production intake is driving the milk production and the milk production is driving the intake as well. So the two of them are intrinsically linked in it. And if you have high producing cows and you're producing 500 kilos of milk solids per year, you are going to have a higher dry matter intake. And if we look at these cows here, peak milk solids at peak intake or peak milk production, we're doing about 2.3, on average, but across the 3 years, there's variation years, but 2.3 to 2.5 kilos of milk solids per cow with variation over the 3 years.
And what would that be in litres for, in all layman's terms, about 30 odd litres, 33 or 4 litres, is it?
Probably, they're high constituents cows, so they're high fat and protein cows, so probably high 20s.
0.08, it'd be 30 litres at 8%.
Yeah.
To be,
so high 20s. We wouldn't have gone over the 30 litre mark. They would have been doing 2.3, 2.5 kilos of milk solid, somewhere around 28 to 29 kilos of milk.
Okay, so very respectable kind of yields coming out.
Yes, and look, if you look at the intakes are driving that. Like we fed on average over the entire study of this over the first 12 weeks, and then thereafterwards an average of just under 2.5 kilos of concentrate per cow, and the remainder was made up then of grass and silage where required. So like it wasn't if there were very high concentrate going into these animals, it was driven by grass, and this is the total dry matter intake, grass and concentrate. So like when they were peaking at 19 kilos of dry matter intake, or just over 19 kilos, there was 2.5 kilos of that concentrate, and the remainder then 16 to 17 kilos was coming from grazed grass.
Yeah, so there's a couple of messages coming out from this, Mike. The first one is that we've been probably underestimating what cows need in early lactation.
Yeah.
For this group, for the group of attendees we have here today, that's a fierce important message. And if there's a gap there, filling it with feed first, but also with quality forage is the route to go.
Yeah, so I think, look, at grass is going to be king. And when there was other parts of this study as well that I'm not going to present today, but like we did have treatments that we had 30% of the diet made up of grass silage, because we manipulated to have a lower opening farm cover. And when we did have grass silage in the diet, it did hit intakes. So they did have about, on average, 0.8 of a lower dry matter intake on average over the spring period, which is on a whole, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but nearly a kilo of a lower dry matter intake is significant in terms of cow intake period, particularly in early lactation. So that if you're increasing the proportion of silage, it is actually reducing the intake because of the higher fiber and longer digestion in it. But more importantly, then long term, it's actually hitting the milk production and milk protein percent on those cows as well. So like, I think this has to be driven from grazed grass, high quality grazed grass. You're making up 3 to 4 kilos of concentrate then, and then if there's still a deficit, you're putting in silage, and the best quality silage that you have as well.
Okay, listen, guys, has anyone any questions that they'd like to ask Mike at this stage? If they have them, we're going to wrap it here. I think it's a very important message there, Mike, for our group of farmers here this morning.
Yeah, look, I think the key thing here is our start point. Where we're starting from a higher base than we originally thought. So we're about 2 to 3 kilos higher dry matter intake on wheat in the first 10 days of lactation. The profile itself in terms of when they're peaking is not changing. We're not peaking any earlier or any later in terms of peak intake, but we're peaking at a higher base as well. So the profile is very, very similar, but it's just always higher than what we originally would have thought. So I think that's the key thing. So allocate your cows enough grass and make up the difference then there afterwards. And when we are hitting peak intakes, we're just over 19 kilos of a peak intake. And sorry, one thing I should have said, George, there was 25% heifers in this group of cows.
Right.
So there was a 25% replacement rate each year on this group of cows. So
if it was solely cows, mature cattle, you'd be talking of intakes there probably 14 or 14 and a half at the start.
Probably not 14 and a half, or probably closer to 14 in week 1. So there was 25% heifers that were just over 10 kilos, 10 and a half kilos of dry matter intake in week 1, and cows then of between 14 to 14 and a half. So like if look, that's not going to happen, but if you have all cows on it, you are going to have a slightly higher intake, but on a 20-25% replacement rate, this is what that profile is looking for at the group of cows that we had.
Okay, listen, that's a very important message there for the group, Mike, here today, and thank you very much for sharing that bit of research with us. Okay, if there's no questions, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call it a day at that, and safe farming, and mind yourselves in the week ahead. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, George.